Before we begin, I want to make an important disclaimer. The information discussed in this presentation comes from publicly available sources, including news reports, public records, online research, and commentary. Throughout this program, you may hear opinions, analysis, theories, and speculation. Those should not be interpreted as established facts unless I specifically identify them as such. No individual discussed in this program is being accused of committing a crime. The purpose of this presentation is to examine publicly available information, discuss the timeline, and ask questions about an ongoing investigation. Everyone should conduct their own research and reach their own conclusions. And most importantly, every individual is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Let's begin by going back several months before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. On October 17, 2025, Savannah Guthrie filmed her Today Homecoming special in Tucson. That visit included filming at the University of Arizona, the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, and other locations around Tucson. The Homecoming Today segment series aired on November 5th. Now let's move forward to Saturday, January 31st, 2026, the last day Nancy was reportedly seen. At approximately 5:32 that evening, Nancy took an Uber to her daughter Annie's home for dinner and a game night. Later that evening, her family reportedly drove Nancy back to her home in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson. At approximately 9:48 p.m., Nancy was dropped off at home. According to the timeline, her garage door opened and closed between approximately 9:48 and 9:50 p.m. This is the last time Nancy is reported to have been seen, and from this point forward, the timeline becomes extremely important. Now we move into the early morning hours of Sunday, February 1st. According to the official timeline, at approximately 1:47 a.m., Nancy's doorbell camera disconnected. Then, at approximately 2:12 a.m., the camera software detected motion. However, according to the information in the timeline, there was no available video because the system did not have a subscription and recorded on a loop. Then, just 16 minutes later, at approximately 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker app disconnected from her phone. Those three times, 1:47, 2:12, and 2:28 in the morning, are important points in this timeline. Several hours later, at approximately 11:56 a.m., a friend from Nancy's church contacted her daughter because Nancy had not attended church. The family then checked Nancy's home and discovered that she was missing. At approximately 12:03 p.m., the family called 911. Authorities arrived at Nancy's home at approximately 12:15 p.m., and the investigation began. Now let's move ahead to Wednesday, February 4th. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings made a public plea. They indicated that they were willing to communicate with potential abductors, but they needed proof that their mother was alive. The presentation also notes that Derek Colella allegedly sent messages to Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni from a VoIP number. One of the alleged messages referenced Bitcoin and asked whether a transaction had been received. There was also reportedly a very brief phone call, approximately 9 seconds, to a family member that same day. On Thursday, February 5th, Colella was arrested in connection with two text messages and the approximately 9-second phone call to the Guthrie family. Authorities also announced a $50,000 reward, and another family member made a public plea on Instagram. Then, on Friday, February 6th, a second ransom note was reportedly received. According to the presentation, that communication claimed Nancy had died after being kidnapped. Also, on February 6th, authorities removed vehicles associated with the investigation, including Nancy's vehicle from her garage, and surveillance equipment was removed from the property. Tuesday, February 10th, brought a major public development in the investigation. The FBI released surveillance photographs and video showing a masked individual at Nancy's property. The surveillance imagery reportedly showed an armed individual wearing a mask, carrying a backpack, and tampering with the camera during the night of February 1st. This individual became widely discussed online as the so-called porch guy. Also on February 10th, the presentation notes that Carlos's home in Rio Rico, Arizona, was searched on the same day he was detained. There was also considerable online discussion about a helicopter flight from the Rio Rico and Nogales area to Banner University Medical Center in Tucson. However, this distinction is extremely important. According to the information included in this presentation, the Pima County Sheriff's Department told ABC 15 journalist Ford Hatchett that the helicopter flight was not related to the Nancy Guthrie investigation. The presentation also notes that claims regarding an 84-year-old passenger had not been independently verified. Then, on Friday, February 13th, at approximately 11 p.m., FBI agents and Pima County Sheriff's deputies searched and towed a vehicle from a Culver's parking lot. According to the presentation, this occurred during a larger FBI and SWAT operation at a nearby residence. Luke's residence was searched, and he and his mother were interviewed. Being searched or interviewed does not by itself establish criminal involvement. On February 24th, the Guthrie family increased the reward dramatically, offering $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. Then, on March 12th, the Sheriff's Department announced that the Honda would soon be returned, and multiple news outlets reported that it was being released back to the family. Throughout March, investigators continued processing DNA, digital evidence, surveillance video, and tips. In April, authorities confirmed that the investigation remained active and that surveillance footage, digital evidence, and forensic results continued to be analyzed. Then, in late June and again in late July, Savannah Guthrie made emotional public appeals asking anyone with information about her mother's disappearance to come forward. Months had now passed, but the fundamental question remained unanswered. What happened to Nancy Guthrie? Before we move into the unanswered questions, I want to make an important distinction. When law enforcement declines to answer a question, that does not automatically mean the answer is suspicious. This remains an active investigation. Investigators may have information they cannot publicly disclose because releasing it could compromise their investigation. We also need to remember that someone being interviewed, searched, investigated, or discussed publicly does not establish that the person committed a crime. Unless law enforcement identifies someone as a suspect or criminal charges are filed, speculation should never be presented as established fact. With that in mind, let's look at the questions that remain. These are some of the biggest questions I believe could help clarify the public understanding of this case. First, what facts can the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirm today that might correct misinformation and prevent innocent people from being subjected to unnecessary public suspicion? Is there evidence that anyone besides Nancy's family saw her before January 31st? Were there phone calls with people outside the family before February 1st? Is there video showing Nancy getting into the Uber? Is there video showing her arriving at Annie and Tomaso's home? And is there video showing her arriving back at her own home later that night? What information, if any, is available from the Apple Watch, including biometrics or location information? And was taking an Uber normal for Nancy, or did she typically drive herself when visiting friends or family? There are also broader questions. Does the Sheriff's Department currently believe Nancy is alive, deceased, or is her condition officially unknown? Has investigators' understanding of what happened changed significantly since the first week? Have investigators established a more precise window for when they believe the abduction occurred? And finally, does law enforcement believe the individual captured on surveillance actually abducted Nancy? Or can investigators only confirm that this person was present at the property? Those are two very different conclusions. Now let's focus specifically on the suspected abduction. Does law enforcement believe Nancy was deliberately targeted? Or is it possible this was an opportunistic crime? Does the sheriff's department believe the perpetrator had prior knowledge of Nancy's routine, her residence, her security system, or her personal circumstances? How did the perpetrator gain entry into Nancy's home? Investigators may not be able to reveal the specific method, but could they at least confirm whether there was evidence of forced entry? Another significant question is Nancy's condition when she left the residence. Have investigators determined whether Nancy left her home conscious and alive? And has law enforcement established whether a vehicle was used to transport Nancy away from the property? Answers to even some of these questions could significantly change how the public understands this case. Another major question is whether one person could have carried this out alone. Does the sheriff's department believe the individual captured on surveillance acted alone? Or is there evidence suggesting that additional people participated in planning, carrying out, or concealing the abduction? Without asking investigators to identify anyone, does law enforcement currently have one or more persons of interest who have not been publicly identified? And what about people who were previously investigated? Have any of those individuals been conclusively eliminated as suspects or persons of interest? Public confirmation that someone has been cleared can sometimes be just as important as identifying someone investigators continue to examine. Now let's talk about the ransom communications. Does law enforcement believe the writer of the genuine ransom note was directly involved in Nancy's abduction? Have investigators determined whether the ransom communications they consider genuine came from the same individual or the same group? Another important question concerns information contained in those communications. Did the genuine ransom communication contain information that investigators believe only someone connected to the crime could have known? And finally, has the sheriff's department found independent evidence supporting any claim that Nancy died after she was abducted? A statement contained in a ransom communication and independently verified evidence are not necessarily the same thing. That's an important distinction when discussing this case. Now we come to the forensic and physical evidence. Have all major pieces of physical evidence requiring forensic examination been submitted for testing? Are significant DNA, fingerprint, digital forensic, or laboratory results still outstanding? Investigators would not have to reveal exactly what they are testing in order to answer whether important results remain pending. There are other questions involving records and evidence. Did the FBI obtain the phone records involving the friend who reportedly contacted Nancy and then contacted the family after Nancy failed to appear at church on February 1st? Why hasn't the public heard the 911 call made by a family member that day? And why are so many documents sealed? The presentation specifically raises questions about the search warrants involving Carlos and Luke, as well as warrants and court documents involving Derek. Again, sealed records do not automatically indicate wrongdoing by the people named in them. There may be legitimate investigative or legal reasons that information remains sealed. Finally, has law enforcement completed its review of the available surveillance and doorbell camera footage from the relevant area and time period? And have investigators identified or accounted for the significant vehicles captured in the area during the suspected abduction period? Now we need to separate internet speculation from established evidence. Numerous people and scenarios have been discussed online. The presentation lists speculation involving Tommaso, Luke, Carlos, Derek, as well as the possibility of an unknown suspect. Other theories discussed online include a stranger who did not know Nancy, neighbors, garbage or recycling workers, people performing work at Nancy's home or neighboring properties, and delivery or rideshare drivers. Those categories could include landscapers, pool cleaners, pest control workers, handymen, roofers, plumbers, painters, UPS or Amazon drivers, Uber drivers, Instacart shoppers, DoorDash drivers, and many others. The internet has also produced theories involving intentional violence, sexual assault followed by violence and removal, or an accidental death followed by a cover up. But I want to emphasize this very clearly. These are theories and internet speculation. Listing a person or a possible scenario does not mean there is evidence supporting that theory. It certainly does not establish that any named individual committed a crime. The purpose of discussing these possibilities is to understand the questions and theories circulating publicly, not to accuse anyone. And that brings us to August 21st, 2026. After all the searches, all the forensic evidence, all the surveillance footage, all the tips, all the interviews, all the public appeals, and all the theories, one question remains at the center of everything. Where is Nancy Guthrie? Behind every headline, every timeline, every theory, and every unanswered question is a woman whose family and the public, especially our YouTube community, wants her home. The purpose of asking questions should not be to create another rumor or accuse an innocent person. It should be to separate what we know from what we don't know, correct misinformation when possible, and continue searching for the truth. If you have legitimate information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, that information belongs with law enforcement. Until there are answers, we keep asking responsible questions. We keep separating facts from speculation. We are searching for the truth and shutting out the noise. And most importantly, we won't ever forget Nancy.
Where is Nancy Guthrie? Dom C 303, searching for the truth, shutting out the noise. Open case, no perp, no evidence, no answers. Crime scene contaminated. Is the case going cold? Where is Nancy Guthrie? When did she leave? Where did she go? Who took Nancy from her home? Where is Nancy Guthrie? Don't see 303, searching for the truth, shutting out noise. Asking questions is the norm. Seeking truth is part of the investigation, but no one has any answers. No one's answering our questions. Where did Nancy Guthrie go? What's the truth? What's the lies? Who's involved? Where is Nancy Guthrie? Where is Nancy Guthrie? Where is Nancy Guthrie? Dom C 303, searching for the truth, shutting out the noise.